Dash community call. This week is our 76th meeting together. So I'm kind of a history person. I like to think about where we've been and how many times we've met, that kind of thing. So anyway, this week what I saw come in, can you see my screen, number one? Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. I'm the kind of person I need a little bit of verbal feedback. So anyway, this week what I saw come in was a few different PRs here, so we could talk about those. And I saw a couple new people on the call, and I was wondering maybe Kumaresh, could you tell us maybe where you're from?
Hi, I'm Kumaresh, and I just joined Microsoft.
Oh,
Before
awesome.
that, I was part of Barefoot Intel.
Awesome. Are you on the VNet team or the SDN team or the what team?
Part of SONiC team and
SONiC team. Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wonderful.
Kumaresh, nice to see you there.
Yeah, thanks, Reshma.
Wonderful. And I know I've met Cynthia before, but remind me.
Hi everyone. I'm part of AMD DPU team.
That's right. Okay. Thank goodness you're here. Okay. And then Amit.
Yeah, I'm part of the SONiC team too.
Oh,
working with
wonderful.
Desai.
Wonderful. Thank you. Awesome. I think that's everyone new. Let me see. Yep. Okay, great. So what I have here, guys, on the right-hand side is I use GitHub projects, and I can link basically to issues and PRs so we can talk about different things that we've done. And so over here are the assignees and the status column, things we've done, not done, that kind of thing. We actually got quite a bit done the last couple of weeks. And so today I wanted to talk about specifically these 4, simply because we had updates come in through email updates this last week. And so I was maybe wondering, Chris, can we start with 395? I know last week you had run a small experiment and updated the issue. And so is there anything new or different for this week?
Not that I'm aware of. I'd ask for some, participation if anyone wants to, take a look at the SciThrift server itself and see if that can be built with the Meta. I don't know if anyone else has a desire to look into that.
Okay.
Chris, did Yuri reached out to you, right?
I don't believe so.
Not yet?
I don't believe so.
Oh, okay. He said he will, so let me ask him.
And it might be that I missed it, but I don't believe I heard from anyone on this one.
I'll just put a comment there. And so moving on to 402. So I don't think I have it in the list. I haven't linked it yet. So let me go to it. Go ahead.
It has been moved to 404. 404.
402 has been moved to 404.
Yeah, I mean the 402 has been closed. It's
okay.
404.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that's this one here. Oh, Amit, and here's your GitHub ID. Great. Okay. So do you want to maybe take us through it, Amit?
So this actually...
I'll give a quick introduction.
Sure.
Mircea here. So basically, we are adding underlay support in BMV2. This is a start. And right now, the default behavior is that all the traffic is going to be hairpin or reflected back on the same port. By adding underlay routing, we maintain the default behavior if no route is being hit, but we are adding ability to add routes. And if a route is being hit, the traffic is going to take the path dictated by the route. And of course, if no match happens, it will hairpin back on the same port. Normal behavior, it's usually to drop if you don't see a route, but we will always have in Dash the default route, which will hairpin back. And Amit from our side basically is the ones that implemented it, and will be able to go in details and provide answers to your questions.
Okay, thanks for the intro, Mircea. Go ahead, Amit.
Yeah, so you could look into the files being, I mean, as Mitya said, it's the, yeah. So what I have done is like I added extra P4 code, which explains the logic of how do you route it to the, if there's a match, it routes to the next, I mean, it routes to the port where to which the traffic has to be forwarded to. That is shown up in the dash pipeline.p44 p4 file. I mean, sorry, the underlay.p4 file. Just below the dash pipeline. So that's the code where, so that.
And if you want to take over the screen and do it on your own, you're welcome to do that. I mean. Did you want to do that, Amit?
Yeah, yeah.
Go for it. Okay.
I'll just share my screen. Yeah, you're able to see the screen, right?
Yeah.
So this is the file where I defined the underlay tables. I mean, this is the place where I have implemented the underlay tables. If you look into the control block underlay, here is the table which I have created, that's the underlay routing. And if the destination IP is matched, that's when we take the next hop action. And in the next hop action, which is shown up over here, you can see that the port has whatever the port we have given in the API that we have loaded into the API, that it passes the traffic to that particular port. And that's this functionality about which has been implemented in this underlay routing file. And after
a quick detailed question there, and we can follow up later.
Okay. You want to ask now or at the end?
Yeah, I just wanted to point it out now, and maybe I should just put a comment on, is this a pull request or this is merged in?
This is a PR.
Oh,
it's
a
404.
PR. 1 second. It's 404.
Okay, so I can just go through a comment on there if there's a detailed question. Okay, I'll do that. Don't mean to disrupt the flow here.
No, it's okay.
That's fine. And after which I have included that particular file in this dash pipeline.p4. You can see it here, the includes, and applying it after the outbound or inbound direction. Yeah, and I have applied it over here. You could look into this line number 464, which is right after the inbound or after the direction has been known, whether it is outbound or inbound. And specific documentation is also been updated in the dash SONiC HLD high level design. And how do I 1 second? Or the tag. 1 second. If you look into the inbound processing, inbound packet processing or the outbound packet processing, you can see this particular underlay routing block has not been added before. It was after the encapsulation, which goes to the VM. And the same happens in the outbound too. After the metering update, it goes directly to the network. And here we introduce the underlay routing. And based on the route match, it forwards the traffic to the particular port. And this was the block which has been implemented.
So Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Prince. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this underlay routing, as I understand, is optional, right? Like if it is not present, then it will just do the hairpinning. So I'm just wondering, like if you put it there, then it means like it goes through the underlay routing all the time, right?
Yeah, it's exactly my question as well. And not only that, but underlay routing that you have here based on the LPM is functionally gives you that routing. But we talked previously about, well, we know we only route to maybe one destination, whatnot. So we should be able to optimize for that case in case routing is enabled, which is already optional. So although this gives you a functional routing, I don't think that should be a requirement. But I'll let you answer Prince's question first.
So I can
Yeah,
take this
I think
question. Yeah, sorry.
go ahead.
Ask. So if we go to SONiC HLD to SWSS Lite, there is a requirement there for SAI route and which has next hop ID, and this is what we are implementing with this PR. So if you scroll here in the HLD to SWSS Lite, the API is there, and it's exactly the SONiC API which was requested. Just scroll to SWSS Lite. Yeah, SWSS. It should be found in the HLD.
I believe this is the
SWSS.
I believe this is the northbound API though. So typically there's a little.
Yeah,
I mean, it's typically one-to-one, but there is a little bit of optimizations for what we need.
Non-X hop route. So just go to route. So route, SAI route entry attribute next hop ID. So this is the APIs that we are implementing in this outbound route. And also, while typical deployment, yeah, and if we think it's maybe only one port, so it really doesn't matter. And if you don't add any route, yes, it will default to hairpinning it back. There could be devices with 2 ports or more ports where this makes sense. And I believe Dash also has a requirement to up to 1,000 routes, 2,000 with HA for the underlay routing.
So we need, in my opinion, the requirements to be clarified for the DPU itself, because I don't think it was clarified. And I think what you're showing typically is one-to-one with the SAI API to our to the data plane, but typically we try to optimize if possible. Saying that we support next hop is one thing. If we only have one, you don't need to do an LPM. You know, there are other ways, right? So I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I'm not clear on the requirements here.
So if there is no route in there, it will do the default behavior, which will be to hairpin it back.
But okay, remember the route is a little bit more than a port. It's also your Ethernet and cap. Okay.
So this is kind of optional, Marsha. I think if even if the SAI requirement is set there, like it's up to the vendor to whether to implement, because I remember we had this discussion in the past about underlay routing, and we made that flexible in the HLD, right? Like if route is there, yeah, go look into the route, but even that should be optimized because it's not an LPM kind of lookup there. So I'm just wondering, like, in a 2-port system anyway, I don't think we need to we need to have this as a requirement.
I agree.
I mean, 2-port, 8-port.
One thing is that we do have this SWSS SAI underlay, and here we do have something like next hop group. We do have ECMP, member, what is this, group member, bunch of SAI attributes, right? SAI, next hop, router interface ID, all those things, neighbor, next hop, those things. So even if it is functional, logical pipeline that we are describing here, and the actual implementation detail is up to the vendor, and they could have LPM or they could do something very simple without having an actual block there, LPM there. But functionality wise, there is something that is needed, right? At the end, when the packet goes out, it is required, right? So, and that's why it's there in the SWSSI underlay. So either way, it could be added
no.
there.
But hold on. What you define in BAV2 also define what the vendor side API has to be. So there's a big, I mean, I understand it's nice to have for functional testing and whatnot, but we need to make sure what the requirements are.
Agree.
Because
So
that
BAV
introduces a new SAI API that the vendors have to implement for things to work.
So
That's the
Vincent, that part is
requirements.
already here.
My
The
understanding
part
is
that's
based on the
highlighted here.
HLD.
Go ahead.
I give you another example.
No, sorry,
ACMP,
Reshma, I didn't want to cut you.
we don't do ACMP, right? And like you say, you got next hop, you got writing interface, you got all those things. You can implement generic APIs for that. Actually, the site has already APIs for that. And we need some of that for the test cases that you guys actually wrote to work. Now, that's fine. But that doesn't mean it's a full requirement. Okay. If it's only one, for instance, then we can easily optimize for it because again, it's not just the port, it's the Ethernet, it's whatever, right? And you don't want to do an LPM lookup. So there's this functional aspects for test cases. That's one part of it, but BMV2 defines the API, the actual API vendors have to implement, and that's what I got a problem with.
But 1 second, how you implement it, yes, it's all up to you. But you still need to implement SWSS Lite and provide support for next ID. So the API, you still need to support it. That's my understanding based on the HLD. What you do with the API after that, in your code, that's your stuff. But BMV2 shows how we should behave. BMV2 is just about the behavior, not the implementation.
I haven't looked at the generated files, but the underlay is going to generate some lookup tables and whatnot, some API. Maybe not. I haven't looked at the generated code.
No, we're not generating any new headers. We're using the fixed SAI headers.
Okay.
So that's one of the, we've kind of gotten down a little bit into talking about requirements, but one of the important things to realize that we did in this implementation that Amit did is he figured out a way to coexist fixed SAI headers with generated headers from Dash and make those and resolve those so that all the generated backend works. So it was actually a kind of an important accomplishment that set a precedent that we have a way of using SAI fixed headers now, whereas before we didn't. Mm-hmm. We can argue about requirements, and then maybe that's an extended discussion. Hopefully it doesn't detract from, the accomplishment here, and that we've got now planted some seeds to be able to express and test what was at this point the official requirement.
Okay.
You know what I mean? There's kind of two levels here. One is, did we accomplish something here, and does it work, and can people make use of it? And the other is, what do we need? What are we held accountable for?
Yeah, I missed that part. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah. And that discussion can probably be an ongoing one in terms of what's implemented. You could say, well, we do support the Swiss Lite API, but we don't really respect the LPM lookup. But you can still make an entry. We'll just do something simple, right? However you want to, declare that. But we need at least some reference point to start with, and this is our stab at it.
So yeah, just another point is that in underlay, we also, with the single port, we are assuming it's always default route. Even with more than one port, the assumption is that it's going to be a default route with ECMP. So I think one thing that's missing here with the BMV2 implementation is the ECMP representation in case of if we have multiple ports.
Yeah, so that will be a different PR that will add. This just adds the next hop, basically the static route, not the ECMP. But again, the requirement is to support here up to 1,000 routes as part of the Dash project. I understand Microsoft may not use it and they will always default to the default route, which will always have pin back. But as Dash goes, I still believe there was a requirement for up to 1,000 routes coming either through BGP or static for the underlay.
But how does that translate in the DPU itself if it's only one port? And where is that 1,000 route requirement?
Not all DPUs have only one port. If I want to deploy Dash on a DPU and not smart switch or something else, I may have 2 ports. I may have 8 ports. We have seen different flavors available on the market that have more than one port. And then routing is important to have as functionality.
I think, Macha, the question is, will we need to implement it now? Will there be test cases that need to pass that will have 1,000 routes, right? I think that's the question. I mean,
and the question also is,
have to implement it now.
Sorry, and the question is also is like, okay, maybe routing is needed, but routing could be anything. It could be multi-level ECMP. It could be a whole lot of things which are totally out of the scope of Dash itself, the Dash data plane. There's a fine boundary there about how much you want to support as part of the Dash data plane until you eventually get to a different subsystem to do the actual routing. You know what I mean? There's a fine line.
Yeah, I think like Chris said, this is a much bigger discussion that needs to be had. This PR implements just next hop ID as per the HLD. This doesn't address ECMP and all this, the world basically. It just adds next hop ID static route as specified in SWSS Lite in the HLD. And we can build on top of it. I mean, it shows how we can take a header from SAI and add the implementation from it. It just does it for next hop ID. So only that API that is specified in the HLD. And we can build on top of it and add all these as we agree to implement them. But I think that's a future discussion.
I'm willing to go with that.
Yeah, I think if there's any DPU with 2 ports, that static route next hop ID will convert to ECMP because there are 2 different routes with the same cost, right? I mean, either port is the same. So maybe we should, like you said, we should discuss it separately and complete that. But it looks like, I think once you have a route, any DPU having 2 ports will need ECMP, or there is no way to.
Yeah, some form of ECMP.
Yeah, some form of ECMP.
Yeah, because I think even from the SAI API point of view, there is the next hop which points to a next hop group in the SAI API, which points to another SAI next hop entry, which ultimately points to a SAI router interface from where you pick up the MAC addresses and then the packet finally goes out. So I guess till now the assumption was that all this is part of the router which is attached to the DPU. All this function, the DPU just slaps on the outer header and sends it to the router, and the underlay routing happens there. So to be complete, the implementation to be complete, we need to look at route, next hop group, router interface, and everything. Neighbor, yeah.
Okay, it'd be nice if there would be a separate discussion to address all the requirements and not guesses about what could be and what not. Because, it could be a can of worm, to be honest. And maybe we don't need it, or I don't know.
A separate discussion to address and go ahead, Vincent, sorry.
The routing needs, exactly what is we need to support.
Yeah, this PR adds only the port as a type. So not an interface, not a VRF. There are 4 types supported by next hop ID in the SAI definition. This PR adds support only for one. This is like the beginning, just to get something going, and then we can build on top.
Yeah, but I'd like to see the end of it as opposed to just let's just pile on to it. You know what I mean? From a vendor perspective, it'd be nice to know. I know it's work in progress, but kind of what is it we're trying to pile on to, to be prepared.
Well, this certainly started a discussion.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
I think this can be treated as like, SWSS Lite can program all these APIs, right? But it's up to the vendor whether to implement that based on the deployment or the application. So some applications may need the proper underlay routing with ECMP support, but some deployments or application may just need to do the hairpinning. So I think from the SWSS Lite perspective, we can invoke these APIs, right? Like with the ECMP Nextstop and Nextstop ID. That's okay, but so the vendor, I think the vendor implementation and the community can decide how we want to translate that. But at least from the requirement, I believe it is clear. I mean, in the sense from the document, it is clear that both options are available and is okay.
Could you remind me how we know that we go to routing or we just go? I don't remember if there's a flag somewhere that says, yeah, you got to do routing, or no, you don't. I don't remember.
There's no flag per se, but
if you don't have a route, so if you don't have a route, it goes into the default behavior to hairpin back.
Hey, one thing, Macha, on that point, right? We need a route either way, right? Otherwise, we don't know what is the neighbor, what MAC address to look up, where to send, right? We need a route anyway. Now, I thought the discussion was more of because without the route, if you have a port, how do you know what is the outer MAC that we need to DMAC that we need to add, right? Because that's not programmed.
Right. I think just to add to that point, right? That's why I think it was mentioned like the route and the neighbor will be added, but it's up to the vendor side implementation whether when you do hairpinning, you don't need to look into these tables, right? Because you can just swap the source and the destination MAC from the original packet itself, right? So in the hairpinning scenario, there's no need for any of these entries, but that's not true for all the DPUs or all the implementation. So that's why the SWSS Lite will still program those entries, but ultimately how that gets translated is up to the implementation. Again, like this also depends on what is the application. So like I can talk from Microsoft perspective, but there could be other deployments that require ECMP from the from the DPU. So yeah.
I mean, I guess we talked about this before. We have this create appliance. We got this appliance thing, which is basically 2 MAC addresses. I suppose we could use. I think we have an API for it. I'm not 100% sure anymore. But that was temporary. I guess this would replace. If you have one combination of route plus reef, you basically have your header, and that's the one you use. You don't need to do an RPM lookup. You just have one combination program that tells you what it is for everybody.
So even the DMAC is programmed there, are you saying, Vincent?
Well, the route gives you 2 things. It gives you the DMAC and the port.
Route would usually give the next hop IP, right? And the IP gets resolved to a MAC by our
and a port. And a port.
Correct. But the MAC address itself would be one step, it's indirected, right? So you have a IP in the next hop, and the IP on the port, we do a ARP and then resolve the DMAC dynamically, right? That's usually the way.
No, I understand routing. What I'm saying is the Dash data plane, if you only have one route, one thing, you don't need to do the RPM lookup. You've done it once and that's it. You cached it, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. My point was, I think there is always a route, right? Because the next stop comes from there. The neighbor entry comes from there.
Sure.
Right. There is always a route. So I think the way I'm understanding it is, so there is a route. Now, how do we treat that route? Do we treat that route as doing full-fledged ECMP, or do we just hairpin it back to the port that it came on? That's an implementation thing from what I'm getting from Prince's statement, right? But otherwise, there is always a route. From SAI, it looks the same. It's just how the implementation behaves depends on the implementation itself on the vendor.
So,
Yeah, did I understand?
I think what Sanjay said, like behaviorally,
that's right.
the default action, there is no equivalent because we will always have a SAI route which hairpins back. That could be a default route, but there's no default action behaviorally in the implementation.
There's no default action.
What we meant is
Got it.
there is no case where there is no route at all.
Right.
Right, there is always a route. Now, how we the difference might be from implementation to implementation, how we treat the route and how we use that route. But there is always a route because otherwise we cannot actually get to what is the outer end cap to use.
Wait, the implementation sure can be different, but the behavior of the packets coming out of the queue should be always the same vendor to vendor. I mean, if I said route, I don't know, 1.1.1.1/32 goes to port 7 of the DPU, I expect to come out of port 7 on all the vendors. And if I enable ECMP, I expect to balance across whatever ports I selected there. And
correct.
If I don't put anything, I expect to be hairpinned back on the same port on all vendors. So unless the vendor, when I say next hop ID, gives me back SAI API not supported, and then, okay, sure, fine. I cannot program a route, so it will always hairpin back on that vendor. But if it lets me program it, it should do. I mean, the packet should come out where I'm expecting it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that is another dimension. Like much I would think you're right, but I think that leads to another dimension. How many routes do we have? So if this default thing of hairpinning, that makes sense if the assumption is we have a default route. Now, if you have specific routes and you have each of those routes pointing to different ports, like I mean, is it a requirement, for example, to have something other than just the default, right? That is the question, I guess. But if we do have a requirement that there are 1,000 routes, if we do have that, then it's quite possible that all 1,000 may not point to the same port, right? It will point to different ports. And if it does, then we will need to have two different next hop and actually honor whatever is the next hop that's given in the route. Right, but I think that maybe we should resolve in terms of, is it just a default route or do we need to have a multitude of routes as a requirement?
Yeah, and this becomes important. When I say 8, I'm not, throwing numbers out there. Like if you have a DPU with 2 ports of 100 gig and you fan them out in 4x25, that gives you 8 25 gig ports, for example. And the spec with next hop ID lets you send the traffic wherever you want out of this 8.
Yeah. So I think the only this thing that I see, right, there is a conflict, right? So if we have a route and we have to do this hairpinning, I think as a requirement to say that what port we got the packet on, we send it back on the same port. If that is the requirement, and having a requirement that we need to honor the actual routing table and actually follow what the route points to, I think these are contradictory requirements, right? It's because there is always a route. Now, whether we follow the port,
No.
Okay, maybe that's my disconnect.
So yeah, so the way we implemented it and we understood it is that, let's say you add 3 routes there, and if it doesn't hit any of the 3 routes, it goes to the default behavior, the 4th thing, which will be to hairpin it back. So if it hits a route, it respects the route. If it does not hit any route, or because you either don't hit it or either because it's not programmed, it will just hairpin back. And that is a before implementation or behavior that we are proposing is like, hey, you put 3 routes there. If you hit these 3 routes, do port 1, 2, 3, whatever the route says. If you don't hit any, hairpin back.
So are you expecting that the pipeline will cache the outer DMAC, SMAC, everything to return it back in the pipeline? Is that that's I think, see, a lot of pipelines will not keep all the outer L2 information through, right? through the full pipeline. It's not necessary to keep that in the packet.
Package should be correct. Yes, the source MAC and destination MAC should be correct in the packet. How it's implemented, it's up to each vendor. But
No. What I'm saying is, once you receive the packet, right, a lot of implementation will strip out the outer Ethernet, right? Because it needs to
And
be
not hold that
regenerated.
information anywhere.
Yeah, through the full pipeline, right? Because when you come out, when you are sending the packet out in the egress, you have to read. I mean, traditionally you have to rederive it again. So it's not necessary that every implementation should have this default route where we carry the MAC address through the full pipeline.
Taking up memory space.
It's a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Yeah, I
So I
think, yeah, if there is a LPM table, the expectation is if it's a miss in the LPM lookup, it's a drop.
it's a drop or a hairpin, because this is very important.
So a hairpin, Mircea, it doesn't have to be that way. So even for hairpin, there can be a route, and that will actually, in the end, the action for that route will be to hairpin the traffic. It's not that there has to be a miss in LPM to do hairpin.
As a user, is a user responsible to program that route, or that route is going to be by default programmed in the DPU?
I think it should be programmed, because otherwise there is no way to derive the MAC on the egress. Unless you keep that full state through the full pipeline, right? Unless you keep what was the incoming source and DMAC and carry that through the pipeline, right? Keep it in our this thing in the packet context through the pipeline. Unless we do that, once you hit the egress, there is no way to derive the DMAC. Right? The only way to derive the DMAC would be have a next hop entry with a neighbor entry actually giving the DMAC to be used, and that would come from a route. Right? That's what I meant was there is no case where there is no route.
Okay. This comment will be really good in the PR, because we'll have to make a change and not hairpin back if there is no route hit. And then we'll have to modify the existing cases, which are assuming hairpin it's already there. And if this API goes in, we'll add in the test cases, basically manually add the route, basically. So the user will add the route to hairpin back.
Yes. We'll have to add the SAI APIs to program the entire path, right? That's the route next stop neighbor. Yeah.
But there was also a requirement. I mean, there is also this thing where the desired behavior from the network might be the route is programmed, but if there is an ECMP decision, the ECMP decision is actually the decision for ECMP is use the incoming port as the outgoing port. Right. So like
Exactly.
there is it's a tangential this thing where that hairpin actually selects which port to use, and you prefer the port that it came in on. Right.
Yeah.
That is another.
The ECMP will the set of tables and the logic will go through in the same manner, whether the action will be hairpinning or something else,
Right.
So it is still always required.
Right.
And that'll be a different PR, right?
Different PR, but it will be good to be specified in the HLD. Maybe we can capture that input and add a paragraph in the HLD about the ECMP behavior.
Yeah.
Okay. So did we come to consensus on this? I'm a little lost now. So are we saying that SWSS Lite can program these? Each supplier SAI implementation can leverage or not? Is that what we're saying?
I think we
does
should
it
let
need
it
more work?
open for people to comment and think on it.
Sounds
I mean, now everybody's aware, after everybody sleeps tonight, probably tomorrow morning, everybody will come with ideas, and maybe we'll talk again next week.
Sounds good.
Some of us will have nightmares and
I was just trying to be helpful here with the PR, okay? Not create trouble.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. You'll see the ones and zeros flashing before your eyes in your dreams.
It's the Matrix screensaver.
Well, thanks for presenting that, Heath. We'll leave it open for the next week. And if you want any specific reviewers on it, you can add them up in the reviewers section.
I added a few.
Oh, did you, Chris?
And
Thanks.
if people want to volunteer or they want to unvolunteer, that's fine too.
Okay, sounds good. All right. And then the other ones I had, so let me share my screen again.
Christina, I just wanted to mention one thing. Now that we have a very good document for the SAI underlay, and it leads to something more concrete and standard like this, and we are able to discuss all these things. So this is really perfect. Another such aspect that also needs to be included in the dash HLD is the set of platform requirements. Like today in PMON, which is a platform monitoring container, we have large number of all these different requirements from the platform monitoring perspective, and which of these will apply, and maybe a subset that we can have a list of that and make it concrete that is applicable only to DPU IPU. That would be really helpful.
Okay, all right. Did anyone from the SONiC team have a comment on that or an answer for that today? Or it's just something we know we need in the future?
Yeah, if Prince
and
is,
I guess that would be
Kumaresh.
Kumaresh or Amit. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I have a quick comment on the PMON part. So I think this is a good point that Reshma is bringing up. So I think depending upon what's the form factor that they're using, whether it's appliance or whether it's a smart switch or whether it's just a DPU only, right? So the requirement could be different, but I would think that if we were to basically look at holistically, it's going to be probably not the subset but the superset of the requirements that we will have to start putting into the PMON site.
Yep. Prince, should I open an issue for that in the GitHub? Or Kumaresh?
I was just going to say, Prince, if you were planning to formalize the dash HLD in SONiC community also, this might be required there as well.
So, Kumaresh, are you there?
Yeah, yes, Krishna.
Do you think this should be opened as an issue for tracking in the GitHub, or how are you thinking to tag this?
Yeah, I think we can open and we can have a discussion and we'll update on that. Yeah.
Okay, I can open that later today then.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, thanks. Cool. So we talked a lot about this one. We also had the dash scale requirement update, so number 403. So that was Reshma. Okay.
Yes.
Did you want to share?
Has.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I mean that's all that we need to share. So what it changes, it reduces the number of ENIs required from 64 to 32. Rest of the numbers, they kind of remains the same in terms of mappings and all the other requirements, which were basically per ENI, remains the same. And we also are adjusting the CPS value in the HLD to match the hero test. I think in the HLD was only 1.5 million CPS, so we brought both in line at 375. And also the flow timer from 1 second got increased to 5 seconds because with the changes that was done a month ago or so to the hero test, we were requiring to have 15 million flows, UDP 15 million flows TCP loaded. At all time, at 1 second, that was creating about 45 to 50 million TPS only to maintain the background traffic. So that was a bit high. So we increased the flow timer from 1 second to 5 seconds, and now only about 9-10 million TPS are required to maintain the background traffic. So these are the 3 changes done to both HLD and the hero test just to keep everything in sync.
Yep. And did you want to comment on this here? I guess you have a couple of comments in the PR is what I'm trying to say.
Hey, Christina. Yeah, I just added 2 comments here. There was if you expand the diff, I don't know if you can do that. It's the line just below where I put that comment. There was a line that said something like, "Oh, we have to." I would recommend setting the timer to like these values to keep the flow table from growing too big. I mean, since we're not setting the flow timeout to 1 second anymore, that sentence doesn't really seem like it applies anymore.
Okay.
Okay, I'll have a look. I mean, we are still setting it to 5 seconds for the same purpose.
Yeah.
But let me see if it applies or not, and I'll correct it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then once I see all that, I can do a merge. So that's what.
Christina, some
go ahead.
The CPS numbers, etc. Maybe I should sync up offline. It's I think we thought it was 3 million. It seems to be 3.75 here.
Hang on, let me go. So we're gonna go to the.
Yeah, I
first
had the
we'll
same
go to.
question.
So this is what's changing here. So there's 2 documents, and this is the hero test right here, and this is the area. I think Marsha that we're changing. Yeah.
Yes. So how we came to 375 is that actually we started from the smart switch requirements of 30 million. And then we divided, and when we divide, became 375, not 3. Yes, originally I think it was 3 or 3.5, but then when you go, you don't reach the number for smart switch of 30 million. So it kind of didn't make sense.
I see. Yeah, I think that'll need to.
If we go back to 3, then maybe the smart switch will have to come down to 20 something million or whatever the math is.
3 into 8, yeah.
But the requirement for smart switch was 30. So when I just divide it down.
Okay.
This is something I need to from AMD side. We need to discuss with
Sure.
Gerald or you to see what is the.
Yeah, sure. And then that would also sync up with the SONiC HLD here. So there's some numbers. If I scroll here, so these will be in line. Basically, is what this PR is saying. So, cool. And then, so last week we closed quite a few. We closed this one. We closed this fast path design because we'll have a new PR upcoming. The pointing the ref point to OCP SAI, these ones. So that was nice to close those. And so here on this one, add the meter policy scale into documentation. I'm actually going to, actually that's not the one. This one, meter questions, Vincent, this one's in progress now because there was a comment on it. Here, the question was, are the meter class buckets separated for fixed counters that are assumed to be on the ENI? And so here's the answer here from Vijay.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a rhetorical question, just make sure I get clarification.
Yeah, so is it okay to close this one, Vincent?
There are still some unanswered questions, I believe.
Still some unanswered questions, okay. All right.
I mean, it was a pretty long description, so.
Yeah. Could you do me a favor and come back and put your next one you'd like answered here, or?
Yeah, will do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay. I'll summarize what's left. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks. And then we're working on this one. This one's new, generate cipher ACL tags. We haven't started that. This one still needs a volunteer. Okay, so that's what I have this week, unless you guys have something that you would like to bring up. Okay, it looks like I can give 7 minutes back. So for people who are new on the call, what I do is at the end of the week, I'll go ahead and send meeting notes summarizing what we talked about, and then update everything here. And so that'll hit your inboxes. And then the recordings get uploaded to YouTube. There's a couple of different channels there. And so there'll be links to that. And then you can also email back with Q&A. So that's all I have. Did you guys have anything else? I'm going to stop the recording and do Andy's 7-second rule.